In the dusty heart of Texas, where judgment travels faster than wildfire and second chances are rarer than spring rain, some souls are written off before their story even begins. But what happens when a man who speaks in actions rather than words sees past the whispers? What happens when someone deemed worthless discovers they were simply waiting for the right place to bloom? This is the story of Ella Mae Henderson and Jack Callahan, two broken souls who found wholeness in each other and proved that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the most unlikely soil. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The autumn sun hung low over Cedar Ridge, Texas, casting long shadows across Main Street as Ella Mae Henderson walked toward Garrett's General Store. Her worn boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk, each step measured and deliberate, as if she were walking a tightrope of public scrutiny. At 28, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself small, to occupy as little space as possible in a world that seemed to have no room for her. The brass bell above the store's entrance chimed as she pushed through the heavy wooden door, and conversations immediately dropped to hushed whispers. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, clutched her pearl necklace a little tighter. Old Tom Bradley suddenly found great interest in the flour sacks. Even young Sarah Jenkins, barely 16, seemed to straighten with superiority as Ella Mae passed. "Morning, Ella," called out Bob Garrett from behind the counter, his voice carrying the kind of forced politeness reserved for customers you tolerate rather than welcome. "Morning, Mr. Garrett." Ella's voice was soft, barely audible above the creaking floorboards. She kept her eyes fixed on her handwritten list, the paper worn thin from being folded and unfolded countless times. As she moved through the narrow aisles, gathering her meager supplies, a small bag of cornmeal, a tin of beans, some thread, the whispers followed her like autumn leaves caught in a persistent wind. "Still can't believe she's staying in that little shack behind the church. Been 3 years since Henry died, and she's never even tried to find work. What use is a woman who can't even keep a garden alive?" Ella's fingers tightened around the cornmeal, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending herself only gave people more ammunition. Better to be silent, to endure, to survive another day. At the counter, she carefully counted out her coins, each one precious and accounted for. As Bob tallied her purchases, the store's front door opened with another cheerful chime, and a different kind of silence fell over the room, the respectful quiet that greeted Jack Callahan. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, his tall frame backlit by the afternoon sun. At 35, he was a man carved by hard work and harder losses, his face weathered but kind, his dark hair showing the first threads of premature gray. He removed his worn Stetson as he entered, nodding politely to the other customers who suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere in the store. His boots, dusty from a morning spent mending fences, made soft sounds against the wooden floor as he approached the counter. Ella Mae stepped aside automatically, accustomed to making way for more important customers, but Jack's deep voice stopped her. "Ma'am." He tipped his head respectfully, his gray eyes meeting hers for just a moment. In that brief exchange, Ella saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Simple human acknowledgement, free of judgment or pity. "Afternoon, Jack." Bob's demeanor shifted noticeably, his voice warmer, more genuine. "What can I get for you today?" "The usual supplies," Jack replied, but his attention seemed divided. From the corner of his eye, he watched as a small commotion erupted near the candy jars. A little boy, no more than 5, had wandered away from his mother and was now crying, overwhelmed by the maze of adult legs and unfamiliar faces, while the other adults continued their conversations, either oblivious to the child's distress or assuming someone else would handle it. Ella Mae quietly set down her packages and knelt beside the boy. Her voice, so often silent in the presence of adults, became gentle and soothing. "Hey there, little one. Are you looking for your mama?" She didn't touch him, respecting his space, but her presence was immediately calming. "I bet she's looking for you too. What's her name?" "Jenny." The boy hiccuped. "Jenny Morrison." "Jenny Morrison," Ella repeated thoughtfully. "I think I saw her by the fabric. She's got pretty brown hair like yours, right?" The boy nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Come on, let's find her together." Jack watched as Ella Mae took the child's small hand and led him through the store, speaking to him in low, reassuring tones. When they reached Jenny Morrison, who had been frantically searching the aisles, the reunion was tearful and grateful. "Oh, Tommy, there you are." Jenny swept her son into her arms, then looked at Ella Mae with genuine appreciation. "Thank you so much. I turned around for just a second." "Children have a gift for wandering," Ella replied with a small smile. "I'm just glad he's safe." As Ella Mae returned to collect her purchases, Jack found himself studying her with new interest. He had lived in Cedar Ridge all his life, and like everyone else, he knew the stories about Ella Mae Henderson, the young widow who had struggled after her husband's death, who had lost her small house when she couldn't keep up with payments, who now lived in the tiny caretaker's cabin behind the Methodist church in exchange for keeping the building clean. But watching her with that frightened child, seeing the natural gentleness in her movements and the genuine care in her voice, Jack began to question what he thought he knew. The transaction at the counter was completed in relative silence. As Ella Mae gathered her packages, preparing to face the gauntlet of whispers that would follow her to the door, Jack made an impulsive decision. "Mrs. Henderson?" His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly in the suddenly still store. Ella Mae turned, surprise evident in her dark eyes. In 3 years of living in Cedar Ridge, Jack Callahan had never spoken directly to her. "Yes, sir. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Outside, if you don't mind." The silence in the store was deafening. Ella Mae felt the weight of every stare, the speculation already beginning to churn behind carefully neutral expressions. But there was something in Jack's manner, respectful, serious, that made her nod. Of course. They stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, the late afternoon air carrying the scent of dust and distant wood smoke. Jack seemed to choose his words carefully, his hands turning his hat brim in a slow, methodical motion. "Mrs. Henderson, I'll speak plainly, if you don't mind. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. It's a good spread, but it's a lot for one man to manage alone." He paused, seeming to gauge her reaction. "I've been thinking about hiring someone to help with the house, cooking, cleaning, maybe tending a vegetable garden, basic household management." Ella Mae's breath caught. A job offer, a real job offer, was the last thing she had expected. She began, then stopped, unsure how to respond. "The pay would be fair," Jack continued, "and there's a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. Private entrance, if you prefer. I spend most of my time working the land, so you'd have the run of the house during the day." "Mr. Callahan, Ella Mae's voice was barely a whisper. "Why me?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying the distant hills. When he spoke, his voice held a certainty that surprised them both. "Because I think you're exactly what that place needs." The Callahan Ranch stretched across rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees and divided by weathered fence lines that seemed to run to the horizon. As Jack's wagon rumbled up the dirt road, Ella Mae sat quietly beside him, her few possessions secured in a worn carpet bag at her feet. She had expected to feel nervous about this dramatic change in her circumstances, but instead, she found herself oddly calm, as if she were finally moving in a direction that made sense. The house came into view as they crested a small hill, a solid, 2-story structure built from local limestone, with a wide front porch and green shutters that had weathered to a soft sage color. It wasn't grand, but it was well-maintained and welcoming, surrounded by mature oak trees that provided blessed shade in the Texas heat. "Built it myself," Jack said quietly, noticing her appraisal. "Took me 3 years, working evenings and weekends. My father always said a man should build his own home." As they approached the house, Ella Mae noticed the details that spoke of a man living alone. The porch chairs positioned for solitary evening contemplation, the single coffee cup forgotten on the railing, the vegetable garden that had clearly once flourished but now showed signs of neglect. Jack brought the wagon to a stop near the kitchen door and jumped down, moving around to help Ella Mae descend. She accepted his offered hand with quiet thanks, struck by the calluses that spoke of honest work and the gentleness with which he assisted her. "Let me show you around," he said, taking her carpet bag despite her protests. "We can start with the house, then I'll show you the outbuildings if you're interested." The kitchen was spacious and functional, with a large wood-burning stove, ample counter space, and windows that faced east to catch the morning light. It was clean but impersonal, lacking the small touches that made a house feel like a home: fresh flowers, curtains, the comfortable clutter of daily life. "This would be your room," Jack said, opening a door off the kitchen to reveal a small but comfortable space with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the back pasture. "Has its own entrance through that door there, so you can come and go as you please." Ella Mae set her carpet bag on the bed and looked around the room that would be hers, the first space she could truly call her own since Henry's death. The walls were plain but freshly painted, and someone had placed a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "The flowers are lovely," she said softly. Jack cleared his throat, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. "Figured it might make the room more welcoming." They continued the tour through the rest of the house: a comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace, a dining room that clearly saw little use, and upstairs, Jack's bedroom and a spare room that he used as an office. Everything was neat and functional, but Ella Mae could see the signs of a man who had built a life for two and then learned to live it alone. "What happened to your wife?" she asked gently as they returned to the kitchen. The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Jack was quiet for a long moment, looking out the kitchen window toward the pasture where a small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. "Sarah died 4 years ago," he said finally. "Fever took her in the space of a week. We'd been married 3 years, trying to start a family." He turned back to face her, his expression honest, but guarded. "I expect people in town have told you I'm not much for conversation." "I don't listen much to what people in town say," Ella Mae replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Something in Jack's expression shifted, a slight softening around his eyes, a hint of what might have been relief. "Good," he said simply, "because I suspect most of what they say about you isn't true either." Over the next few days, they settled into a comfortable routine. Jack rose before dawn to tend to his cattle and check his fences, returning to the house around noon for a simple lunch that Ella Mae prepared. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing, amazed by how satisfying it felt to restore order and comfort to the neglected spaces. The abandoned vegetable garden became her special project. The plot was larger than she had expected, with good soil and excellent drainage. Previous seasons had left behind the bones of a once thriving garden: tomato stakes weathered gray by sun and rain, herb plants gone wild but still fragrant, bean poles waiting for new vines to climb. Sarah loved that garden, Jack mentioned on her 3rd day, finding her kneeling among the weeds with a bucket and hand tools. Spent hours out there every morning, talking to the plants like they were old friends. "Did she grow vegetables or flowers?" Ella Mae asked, carefully uprooting a stubborn dandelion. "Both," said there was no point in having a garden that wasn't both useful and beautiful. Jack crouched down beside her, his hands automatically beginning to help with the weeding. She always said the best gardens were the ones that fed both the body and the soul. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the morning sun warming their backs as they gradually revealed the garden's potential. Ella Mae found herself stealing glances at Jack as he worked, noting the careful way he handled the young plants that had volunteered from previous seasons, the gentleness with which he cleared away debris without disturbing the beneficial insects that had made their homes among the leaves. "You don't have to help," she said eventually. "I know you have your own work to do." "This is peaceful," Jack replied, sitting back on his heels to survey their progress. "I'd forgotten how satisfying it could be to make something grow instead of just maintaining what's already there." That afternoon, while Jack rode out to check on his cattle in the far pasture, Ella Mae walked to town to purchase seeds and young plants from the nursery behind Garrett's store. She had expected the usual whispers and sideways glances, but she was unprepared for the outright hostility that greeted her. "Well, look who's gotten herself a soft landing," Mrs. Patterson remarked loudly to her companion as Ella Mae selected tomato seedlings. moving right into poor Sarah Callahan's house before the sheets are even cold. Shameful, if you ask me, agreed Mrs. Winters, the doctor's wife. That poor man doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. Ella Mae's hands trembled slightly as she counted out coins for her purchases, but she kept her voice steady as she spoke to old Pete, who ran the nursery. These tomatoes should do well in full sun, shouldn't they? Pete, who had always been kind to her, nodded encouragingly. Best variety for this climate. Sarah Callahan always grew these same ones, said they never failed her. The mention of Sarah's name in connection with the garden seemed to inflame Mrs. Patterson further. It's an insult to her memory, that's what it is. That woman living in Sarah's house, tending Sarah's garden. Ella Mae had endured 3 years of whispers and judgment, but something about the deliberate cruelty in the woman's voice finally sparked her anger. She turned to face Mrs. Patterson directly, her dark eyes flashing with uncharacteristic fire. "Ma'am, I'm not living in anyone's house but Mr. Callahan's, and I'm not tending anyone's garden but the one he's asked me to restore. If you have concerns about my character or my intentions, I'd appreciate it if you'd speak to me directly instead of around me." The small crowd that had gathered fell silent, shocked by Ella Mae's unexpected backbone. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red with indignation. "Well, I never—" "No, ma'am, I don't believe you have," Ella Mae replied quietly, gathering her purchases. "And perhaps that's the problem." As she walked home along the dusty road, her anger gradually gave way to something else, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Henry's death, she had stood up for herself, had claimed her right to dignity and respect. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, as she and Jack sat on the front porch watching the sun set over the pasture, she told him about the encounter in town. She expected him to be concerned about potential trouble, but instead, he smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "About time someone put Martha Patterson in her place," he said, taking a long sip of coffee from his evening cup. "She's been running roughshod over this town for too long." "I hope I didn't cause problems for you," Ella Mae said worriedly. "People might think." "People are going to think what they want to think regardless of what we do or don't do," Jack interrupted gently. "The question is whether we're going to let their thinking determine how we live our lives." As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ella Mae felt something settle into place inside her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since childhood. Here, on this porch, with this quiet man who saw her as more than the sum of her losses, she was beginning to remember who she might have been all along. 3 months into her employment at the Callahan Ranch, Ella Mae had transformed more than just the house and garden. She had begun to transform herself. The woman who had once moved through Cedar Ridge like a ghost was learning to take up space again, to speak with confidence, to believe in her own worth. The changes were evident everywhere. The house now hummed with life. Wildflowers from the garden graced every room. Curtains sewn from cheerful fabric fluttered in the windows, and the kitchen always carried the warm scents of fresh bread and simmering stews. The vegetable garden had become the envy of the county, producing an abundance of tomatoes, beans, squash, and herbs that Ella Mae preserved and shared with neighbors who were gradually warming to her presence. But it was the change in Jack that surprised everyone most of all, including himself. The silent, solitary rancher had begun to smile more, to linger over meals, to find excuses to work closer to the house, where he could hear Ella Mae humming as she went about her tasks. Their conversations, once limited to practical matters, had deepened into discussions of books, dreams, and the kind of life they each hoped to build. "You know what I love most about this time of year?" Ella Mae asked one evening as they sat on the porch, shelling peas from the garden. The late summer air was soft and sweet, carrying the songs of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle. "What's that?" Jack asked, his hands working steadily at the task. "The way everything feels possible," she replied, holding up a perfect pea pod to catch the last rays of sunlight. "In spring, you plant seeds hoping they'll grow. But in late summer, you can see what your faith has produced. You can hold the harvest in your hands." Jack looked at her profile in the golden light. noting the way her dark hair had loosened from its usual severe bun, the flush of health and contentment in her cheeks, the confidence in her posture that had gradually replaced the defensive hunching of her shoulders. "Ella Mae," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up from her work. "I need to tell you something." She set down her bowl of peas, giving him her full attention. Over the months, she had learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, and she could see that whatever he wanted to say was important. "When I first asked you to work here, I told you it was because I needed help with the house," Jack began, his hand still for once, the half-shelled peas forgotten. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Ella Mae waited, her heart beginning to beat faster. "The truth is, I saw something in you that day in the store. The way you cared for that lost child, the gentleness in your hands, the strength in your silence. I saw a woman who had been knocked down but not defeated, who had learned to survive in a world that seemed determined to dismiss her." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and intent. "I saw someone who might understand what it meant to rebuild after losing everything that mattered." "Jack," she whispered, but he continued, "I'm not a man who's good with pretty words, Ella Mae. I'm better with actions, with showing rather than telling. But I need you to know that what I feel for you, it's not gratitude for your work around the house, and it's not loneliness looking for any port in a storm. It's," he struggled for the right words, "it's recognition, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Tears gathered in Ella Mae's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." They moved toward each other slowly, carefully, like two people who had learned that precious things could be broken and wanted to handle this moment with the reverence it deserved. When Jack cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her gently, it felt like coming home. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was conducted under the watchful eyes of the entire county. Every trip to town, every shared moment on the front porch, every smile exchanged at church became fuel for speculation and gossip. Some of it was benign curiosity, but much of it carried the sharp edge of disapproval. "It's indecent," Mrs. Patterson declared loudly at the church social, her voice pitched to Carrie. "That woman worming her way into poor Jack's affections, taking advantage of his grief and loneliness." "She's got her hooks in him good," agreed Mrs. Winters. "Mark my words, she'll have him married before the year's out, and then she'll show her true colors." But for every harsh word from the town's self-appointed moral guardians, there were quieter voices of support. Old Pete from the nursery made a point of complimenting Ella Mae's garden every time he saw her. Jenny Morrison, the mother of the lost child from that first day, began seeking out Ella Mae's company at church functions. Even Bob Garrett at the general store had softened his attitude, noting how much happier Jack seemed these days. The real test came on a crisp October morning when Dr. Martin's buggy came racing up the ranch road, dust billowing behind the wheels. Jack was in the far pasture, but Ella Mae saw the urgency in the doctor's approach and ran out to meet him. "Mrs. Henderson, thank God you're here," Dr. Martin called out as he pulled up at the house. "There's been an accident at the Morrison farm. Jenny's husband was thrown from his horse, and she's about to give birth. I need all the help I can get." Without hesitation, Ella Mae gathered her shawl and climbed into the buggy. "What can I do? You're good with children, and Jenny trusts you," the doctor said as they raced toward town. "I need someone to look after young Tommy while I tend to his father and deliver the baby. But I should warn you, it's going to be a long, difficult night." The Morrison farmhouse was in chaos when they arrived. Jenny was in labor in the bedroom, her husband unconscious on the kitchen table where Dr. Martin had set up his makeshift surgery, and 5-year-old Tommy was crying in terror in the corner, overwhelmed by the adults rushing around and the frightening sounds coming from his parents. Ella Mae went straight to Tommy, kneeling down to his level and speaking in the same calm, soothing voice she had used that day in the store. "Hey there, remember me? I'm Ella Mae," she said gently. "I know this is scary, but Dr. Martin is taking very good care of your mama and papa. What do you say we go sit on the porch where it's quieter, and I'll tell you a story?" For the next 12 hours, Ella Mae managed the household, caring for Tommy, bringing hot water and clean cloths to Dr. Martin and providing comfort and encouragement to Jenny during the difficult birth. She moved through the crisis with calm efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced, offering reassurance where it was needed most. When the sun rose on a healthy baby girl and a father who would recover fully from his injuries, the exhausted doctor pulled Ella Mae aside. "I've never seen anyone handle a crisis like that," he said quietly. "You have a gift, Mrs. Henderson. You should consider training as a midwife. God knows this county could use one." Word of Ella Mae's heroic night spread quickly through Cedar Ridge, and the story grew in the telling. By the time Jack heard it at the feed store, she had single-handedly saved the entire Morrison family and delivered the baby herself. He raced home to find her in the kitchen, calmly kneading bread dough as if she hadn't just spent the night fighting for 2 lives. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. "I'm fine," she said, smiling up at him. "Tired, but fine. Jack, it was the most amazing thing, being truly needed, being able to help in a real way. I'd forgotten what that felt like." Looking at her glowing face, Jack made a decision that had been building in his heart for weeks. "Marry me," he said simply. Ella Mae's hand stilled in his. "What?" "Marry me, Ella Mae. Not because I need a housekeeper or because you need security, but because I love you. Because you make my life better just by being in it. Because when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it." She studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the hope and fear warring in his expression. "The whole town will have something to say about it." "Let them talk," Jack said firmly. "We'll give them something worth talking about. A marriage built on respect and love and partnership. A life lived on our own terms." Ella Mae thought of the woman she had been when she first walked into Garrett's store, shoulders hunched against the world's judgment, believing herself to be exactly as worthless as everyone said. Then she thought of the woman she had become, confident, capable, loved. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, with joy breaking across her face like sunrise. "Yes, Jack Callahan, I'll marry you." The wedding of Jack Callahan and Ella Mae Henderson took place on a crisp November morning in the small Methodist church where Ella Mae had once lived in the caretaker's cabin. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a surprising number of well-wishers who had come to appreciate the quiet strength and genuine kindness that both bride and groom brought to their community. Ella Mae wore a dress of soft blue wool that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers from her garden tucked into her dark hair. Jack stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle alone, not because she had no one to give her away, but because she had chosen to give herself. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 souls who have found in each other not just love, but recognition, the deep understanding that comes when 2 people see each other truly and completely." In the front pew, Jenny Morrison held her newborn daughter while Tommy sat beside her, grinning at Ella Mae and giving her an enthusiastic wave. Dr. Martin sat with his wife, nodding approvingly. Even Bob Garrett was there, having closed the store for the morning to attend. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Mrs. Patterson and her circle of friends had made their disapproval known by their pointed absence, but their empty pews were more than filled by others who had come to celebrate this unlikely love story. "Do you, Jack, take Ella Mae to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," Jack said clearly, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Ella Mae, take Jack to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Ella Mae looked into Jack's gray eyes and saw her future there, not a future of mere survival, but one of growth, partnership, and love. "I do." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before God and their community. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Ella Mae caught sight of her reflection in the church's old mirror by the door. The woman looking back at her was radiant, confident, beloved. Nothing like the broken creature who had once crept through these same doors, seeking only shelter. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard under the oak trees. Ella Mae had insisted on preparing most of the food herself, despite Jack's protests, and the tables groaned under the weight of her cooking. Roasted chickens and beef, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and pies that had become legendary throughout the county. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Jack found himself marveling at the transformation not just in his new wife, but in his own life. His house was full of laughter and conversation, his table surrounded by friends and neighbors who had come to wish them well. This was what Sarah had always dreamed their home would become, a place of warmth and welcome, where love made everyone feel like family. "Penny for your thoughts," Ella Mae said, appearing at his elbow with a cup of coffee. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Jack replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "A year ago, I was rattling around in that house like a ghost, convinced I'd never feel alive again. Now, she prompted, smiling up at him. "Now I feel like the luckiest man in Texas." As evening approached and the guests began to take their leave, Dr. Martin approached the newlyweds with a proposition. "Ella Mae, I've been thinking about what I said after the Morrison baby was born," he began. "Would you be interested in training as a midwife? I could teach you what you need to know, and God knows this county could use someone with your skills and temperament." Ella Mae looked at Jack questioningly, but he was already nodding encouragingly. "It's up to you," he said, "but I think you'd be wonderful at it." "I'd like that very much," Ella Mae replied, her voice filled with excitement at the prospect of this new purpose. "Good," Dr. Martin said, shaking both their hands. "We'll start after you get back from your honeymoon." Their honeymoon was a simple affair, 3 days in San Antonio, staying at a modest hotel and exploring the city together. For Ella Mae, who had rarely traveled beyond Cedar Ridge, it was a grand adventure. But what she treasured most were the quiet moments: morning coffee on their hotel balcony, evening walks along the river, the simple pleasure of being introduced as Mrs. Callahan, and seeing the pride in Jack's eyes when he said it. When they returned to the ranch, they found surprise waiting for them: a beautiful rocking chair on the front porch, crafted from oak and cushioned with fabric that matched Ella Mae's wedding dress. "It's from the church ladies," Jack explained, reading the note that had been left with it. "Even some of the ones who were less than supportive initially. I think you've won them over." Ella Mae ran her hands over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship and the gesture it represented. "It's beautiful." That evening, as they sat together on the porch, Jack in his usual chair, Ella Mae in her new one, watching the sun set over their land, they talked about their dreams for the future. "I'd like to expand the garden," Ella Mae said, her hands moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "Maybe add some fruit trees, definitely more herbs for medicinal purposes if I'm going to be working with Dr. Martin." "We could do that," Jack agreed. "And I've been thinking about increasing the herd, maybe building a better barn." "Children?" Ella Mae asked quietly, the word hanging in the air between them like a prayer. Jack reached over and took her hand. "If we're blessed with them, yes. But even if we're not, we have each other. We have this place. We have purpose." 6 months later, Ella Mae's skills as a midwife had become legendary throughout the county. She had successfully delivered 8 babies, including twins for the Hendersons, no relation, despite the shared name, and had earned the respect and gratitude of families throughout the region. Her gentle manner and competent hands made her the preferred choice for expectant mothers, and Dr. Martin had begun relying on her expertise more and more. The ranch had prospered as well. With Ella Mae managing the household and garden, Jack had been able to expand his operations, and their beef was now sought after by buyers from as far away as Dallas. The house had become a gathering place for neighbors and friends, known for its warm hospitality and excellent food. But the greatest change was in Ella Mae herself. The woman who had once believed herself useless had discovered that she was, in fact, indispensable, not just to Jack, but to her entire community. She moved through the world now with confidence and purpose, secure in the knowledge of her own worth. On a warm spring morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Ella Mae sat in her rocking chair on the front porch, her hands resting on the growing curve of her belly. Jack's child, their child, moved restlessly within her, as if eager to join the world that its parents had worked so hard to build. Jack emerged from the barn, pausing to wash his hands at the pump before climbing the porch steps to join her. He kissed the top of her head before settling into his chair, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. "How are you feeling?" he asked, as he did every morning. "Full of possibility," Ella Mae replied, the same answer she had given him months ago when describing her love for late summer. But now the words carried additional meaning. She was literally full of new life, carrying within her the future they had built together. "Mrs. Patterson stopped by yesterday while you were in the north pasture," Ella Mae said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Martha Patterson? Here. That's unexpected." "She brought a baby blanket she'd knitted," Ella Mae continued, her smile growing wider. "Said she wanted to apologize for her previous misunderstandings about my character. Apparently, when her daughter-in-law went into labor last month and I was the one who helped bring her grandson safely into the world, it changed her perspective considerably. The same woman who called you worthless is now knitting blankets for our baby?" Jack shook his head in amazement. "You've turned this whole town upside down, you know that?" "We did," Ella Mae corrected gently. Together, as if summoned by their conversation, a familiar wagon appeared on the horizon, raising a small cloud of dust as it approached the house. Dr. Martin pulled up to their gate, but instead of his usual urgent haste, he moved with the relaxed pace of a social call. "Morning, Jack, Ella Mae," he called out as he climbed down from his wagon. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Perfect day," Jack agreed, rising to shake the doctor's hand. "What brings you out our way?" Dr. Martin's weathered face creased into a grin. "Well, I have some news I thought you might want to hear. The county medical board has officially recognized Ella Mae as a certified midwife. Her record of successful births and the testimonials from families throughout the region have been nothing short of remarkable." Ella Mae's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with surprise and delight. "Officially recognized?" "Complete with a certificate and everything," Dr. Martin confirmed, pulling a rolled document from his coat. "There's more, though. They've asked if you'd be willing to train other women in the county. Seems your reputation has spread beyond our little corner of Texas." Jack watched his wife's face light up with joy and pride, and felt his own heart swell with love for this extraordinary woman who had transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. "Of course I would," Ella Mae said, accepting the certificate with trembling hands. "To think that I could help other women learn to bring life safely into the world. It would be an honor." As Dr. Martin prepared to leave, he paused at his wagon and looked back at the couple on the porch, Jack tall and strong beside his wife's chair, Ella Mae radiant with pregnancy and purpose, both of them surrounded by the abundant life they had created together. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I first came to this county 20 years ago, people used to say that Cedar Ridge was a place where dreams went to die. Too small, too isolated, too set in its ways. But looking at you two, seeing what you've built here, I think maybe it's actually a place where the right kind of dreams come true." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ella Mae and Jack sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The garden was in full bloom around them, the cattle were settled peacefully in the pasture, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the laughter of neighbor children playing. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Ella Mae asked suddenly, "when you offered me this job?" "Every day," Jack replied honestly. "I think about how close I came to saying nothing, to just watching you walk out of that store and out of my life forever." "What made you speak up?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I think it was the way you handled that lost little boy. The gentleness, the natural way you knew exactly what he needed. But more than that, it was the way you made yourself small for everyone else. But when that child needed you, you became exactly as big as the moment required." "I was so scared," Ella Mae admitted. "Scared of hoping for something better, scared of failing, scared of being disappointed again." And now, she placed both hands on her belly, feeling their child move in response to her touch. Around them, The ranch hummed with quiet prosperity. Chickens pecking in the yard. The garden heavy with vegetables that would feed their family and their neighbors. The house behind them filled with the comfortable accumulation of a shared life. "Now I know that the best things in life aren't the ones you chase," she said softly. "They're the ones that grow slowly, day by day, choice by choice, kindness by kindness. They're the ones you build with your own hands and heart." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jack reached over and took his wife's hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his own. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to serve their community and nurture their growing family. But tonight, sitting on their porch with a woman who had taught him that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil, Jack Callahan knew that he was exactly where he belonged. "They called you useless," he said quietly, lifting her hand to his lips. "They were wrong," Ella Mae replied, her voice steady and sure. "We all were. I was never useless. I was just waiting for the right place to bloom." And in the gentle Texas evening, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but faith, hard work, and love, they sat together in perfect contentment, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful gardens do indeed grow in the most unlikely soil. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.